who may be waiting. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to join us. Right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome one and all to those who have joined this presentation on leaving the UK for Portugal. We'd like to welcome you all to a very short presentation. We know that those based in the UK and outside have a rather important engagement in about an hour's time.
Yes.
So we're going to be conscious to make sure that we stick to the time as far as is possible. I'm joined by my fellow presenter Robert Webb from Chase Buchanan, and Robert and I are going to cover today in a fairly hasty but hopefully interesting fashion the steps that need to be taken and can be taken, especially at a distance, for those of you who are looking to move from the UK to Portugal. I'm going to do the first half of the presentation, which is much more around the administrative and logistical, including accommodation and real estate elements of this move. And Robert is going to cover the second half, which is very much more about the planning, financial, fiscal, and otherwise that needs to be done ahead of time in order to make sure that there are no conflicts or confusion after the fact. So I just did a bit of an introduction to give people a bit more time to join, but given that we're now a minute past 4 o'clock, I'm going to start with a bit of background about us. Normally I don't speak much about the business as such, but we think that as there are a number of people who haven't had contact with us in the past, basically describe what we do. So our business, this business was founded in 2014. Its focus is on IRM, which is dealing with people from all over the world that effectively move from one place to another pre or during retirement. So retirees or pre-retirees that move from their home country to a destination country. We're a UK headquartered company, but our destination markets are primarily Portugal and Spain. We are looking at a few others, but we have what we call these ambassadors spread around the world in nations or in countries where there is a fairly large representation of aspiring immigrants, if you will, or expats looking to move. We have a multilingual team located in most of the major regions of Portugal. When I say major, without any sort of discrimination, I mean those that are most sought after by expats. So we have the Algarve, Greater Lisbon and Cascais, the Silver Coast, which I forgot to put in there, and Porto. We get inquiries from around 75 countries and we have clients from around 30. So it's very much a multinational style business where we're helping people from different sources, and often these processes overlap or are similar. So we believe we can be quite a useful assistance in the sense that we've often seen something happen in one country that then happens in another. And a good example is the D7 visa. As we all know, the D7 visa is something very recent for the UK post-Brexit, but it's something that's been going on for many years in other countries such as the US, Brazil, and Canada. So the fact that have been working with those for many years means that we can apply some of our knowledge and expertise to assisting clients coming from the UK and doing a similar thing. We do have many years of experience with things such as the non-habitual residency, the D7 and golden visa. I think importantly for those listening, because accommodation and where you live will be a key point, a factor of what you need to do, we are really the only company that works strategically with both rentals and sales across Portugal. So we don't really mind what our clients do in the end in that area, in that sense, whether they opt for a rental, buy something, rent, and then buy. It doesn't matter for us from an accommodation perspective. We're happy to help either, and we won't discriminate. We do try to help a broad range of clients, and apologies again for focusing on the real estate or the accommodation element, but it's a big part of what we do in addition to a number of other things, but it is a big part. And again, we try not to be too discriminatory. So clearly there are minimum limits below which it's very difficult to make any money. But really we have clients that rent between 500 and 4,000 euros a month, and clients that buy between maybe 75,000 or so and more than 2 million. So we really work with clients, and we try to work with clients across a whole spectrum of pricing points and values. One of the value-added advantages we bring is we understand that businesses cannot work alone, and the fact that Robert and I are talking jointly on a presentation, I think, is testament to that. But we have a network of over 50 specialist partners on the ground. So we're not a lawyer, but we know many lawyers. We're not a bank, but we can introduce you to many banks. We're not insurance providers, but we have a plethora of either insurance advisors or insurance companies owned by banks or otherwise. We work with car importation, but we don't do that ourselves. We even work with ACP in car importation. So part of the business model is that we are a go-to type company that can really be a single point of contact and allow you to blow through us to a whole range of specialist suppliers, if I can use them that. And then coming back to the real estate side, we try to help in the sense that we can consolidate that search process that you may have either on the rentals or on the purchase side, because we have already built up this inventory of partners on the ground, which number hundreds on the ground in Portugal and hundreds on the ground in Spain. As an example of this, what we've done is many years of investment. We've built a long-term rental portfolio in the Algarve, for example, called Algarve Long Lets. And so a lot of people who start out with their adventure in Portugal want to rent first or rent ongoing, and they would go to a site like that, which is run by us, and then we have this portfolio of properties. And then just nothing to do with this specifically, but we would like to encourage you all to participate in this survey. It only takes 5 minutes. We are in the background running this rolling survey of experiences of people moving to or living in Portugal, and we use that to discuss this with the Portuguese tourism authorities to get them to drive at times investment into certain areas of the market, and also to fine-tune some of the offerings that people require when they move to the country. Apologies about the jumping around. So I would first like to talk about the golden visa. There are 2 residency options that non-EU citizens have on the assumption that they're looking to move to Portugal permanently. The 2 most common are the golden visa or the D7. So the golden visa is the one that you've probably heard a lot about, which is where all the Chinese were investing in Lisbon for many years. There are 4 golden visa categories, and those are the 4 levels of investment that are available, and they depend essentially on location. The important thing at this stage is that anyone wishing to take the golden visa route as a residency route must be aware that the high density golden visa areas will disappear, so they will no longer qualify for residential properties by the end of 2021. Okay, commercial properties and touristic, which anyone who's interested in this can email us afterwards, but there's a specific definition for touristic. They will continue to be eligible, but only the low density golden visa for residential properties will be eligible after or from the 1st of January 2022. Historically, golden visas have been sold in the Lisbon and Porto historical areas and in Cascais. South Africans, for example, buy a lot in Cascais. And they have been they've tended to be mostly short-term revenue properties and not a hose with fixed income, but those with fixed income, of course. And most people don't want to spend 500,000 if they can get away with not having to spend it. So often what we found in the urban areas is people have been asking us for 350,000 golden visa, which are urban regeneration properties, but those have become very scarce, especially in areas like Lisbon and Porto, because prices have gone up so much. And so we often find that the lower cost golden visa has a very high price per square meter. So those of you looking for value need to be aware of the fact that because of inflationary pressures caused by this demand from third-party nations, many of the golden visa product in locations such as the Lisbon and Porto have become quite expensive on a per square meter basis, and you need to be aware of that. Where should golden visa buyers be considering given these factors? Well, firstly, and this is a recommendation, if you will, or a suggestion, they're all over the country in terms of low density areas, mainly in the interior. But we think that a good balance that can be struck is for golden visa applicants who don't want to use the property themselves. They should be looking at the 280,000 euro golden visa, but in popular areas such as the Algarve. There are one or two opportunities inland in the Algarve which strike a balance between a low entry point, and the fact that the properties themselves are based in what is still the country's most desirable tourist location. And so that creates an interesting combination. And the other is to cherry pick opportunities from low density golden visa areas on the coast. You will have noticed that I mentioned earlier that most of the high densities were on the coast, which is true, but there are a few low density areas on the coast, and so looking for opportunities in those tends to be a good way of going about the golden visa, because it also means that in the future there may be a bigger pool of sellers, if you want to, or sorry, of buyers, if you want to resell your golden visa property. Just briefly going through the golden visa and purchasing costs, and I'm sure some of you who've listened to presentations have had enough of people telling you the same information, but for those who haven't, here it goes again. Typical closing costs, 5 to 8% of purchase price. The transfer tax is a sliding scale from 0 to 8%. Land is fixed at 6%, and property is above 1 million at 7.5%. Stamp duty is fixed at 0.8%. Legals or conveyancing are typically 1% plus VAT, which is 23% on that. But you are able to find lawyers that sometimes do a bundled offering. I talk about this later on, where they bring together the work that they do on the conveyancing, so that's the purchasing of the property, as well as the application for the golden visa itself. Okay, so they will sometimes bundle this in a packaged legal offering, which tends to be a bit cheaper than doing the two individually. You then have some incidentals, probably around 500 euros or so, and there is an interesting thing which doesn't really apply to, I would imagine, people on this presentation, that IMT is exempt for certain types of purchases, including land held by companies in administration, for example, but that typically will not apply. The golden visa applications, which are in addition to the costs involved with purchasing your property, those fees are around 5,300 per applicant, and then 2,700 per renewal, and there is also a processing fee as stipulated there. And then there are lawyer fees, and this is where I say it pays to either negotiate or talk to companies such as ours that sometimes have identified some of these lawyers that have bring together these packages. And again, I think a point we should make, we don't make any commissions or fees on these sort of referrals to lawyers. We prefer the panelist lawyers on to whom we make referrals to remain totally independent and not be tempted by having to pay someone some sort of commission. So this sometimes occurs and reduces the independence, I would argue, of some of this work. The golden visa typically is taking 6 months, but it is the application date that actually locks in your rights. So as long as you buy a property and apply before the 31st of December, and for those considering this, please don't leave it till the 31st of December, because there'll be thousands of other people theoretically trying to do the same thing and blocking the system. So try to make sure that you're doing this sensibly at least a few months before the deadline. The alternative to the golden visa is the thing we call the D7. This is a residency solution as well. So what is it? It's an income-based residency visa. So rather than taking the golden visa route, which is an investment, the D7 can be obtained either via a property purchase with no minimum values. You can buy whatever you like as long as you can live in it and prove that it's going to be your residence, or you can have a long-term residential lease. It can be combined with tax programs where, of course, you as an applicant qualify, such as the non-habitual residency, which is the low tax regime in Portugal. And just to make absolutely clear, The D7 and the Golden Visa are residency programs. The non-habitual residency is a tax program. You cannot apply for something like the NHR, a tax program, until you have the right to live in the country. So if you're an EU citizen, and say you have a second passport, like an Irish passport, you don't need to go through a D7 or Golden Visa. You can just arrive in Portugal and live like you can do in any EU country, and you can apply for the NHR. But if you are a British citizen, if you only have a British passport, you're now outside the EU, and we must therefore apply for a visa. Once we have that residency visa, we can then apply for the tax status like the NHR. Now, the D7 must be applied for from the country of origin, but it does involve some challenges, and we get phone calls about this all the time, emails and phone calls. And I've listed some because this is important for those of you who are attempting to do this. Firstly, it requires you gathering all the different information and data, and not all of it is easy to understand. Sometimes the actual guidelines and the consulates subcontract this to a company called VFS, and they are not very helpful usually in terms of answering questions. They're quite efficient in terms of helping you package up, but you've got to do the work. COVID-19, of course, means that you have difficulty dealing with matters in Portugal, whereas in the past you could hop on a Ryanair flight or an EasyJet flight or whatever, a TUI flight, so that none of them feel angry with us for not having promoted them, and land up in Portugal and do some things. Now it's very difficult to do that. And yesterday the Portuguese government put the UK on the blacklist, meaning that anyone from the UK that is not fully vaccinated must quarantine for 14 days, which means that that's even more difficult to do for so-called non-essential travel. You then have to coordinate, if you're doing this, multiple suppliers. So if you are not an expert in insurance, or an expert in accommodation or finding a rental, or an expert in getting a fiscal number, clearly you're going to have to be managing these different relationships unless you find someone who can assist with this coordination. The cost is another factor. We have seen, unfortunately, and for that I do apologize, a number of suppliers in the market that have started to charge exaggerated prices for what they do. So a fiscal number might cost you 10 euros if you walk in. Some people are charging you 200 euros to get a fiscal number, or 300 euros. I mean, the ridiculous amounts of money. So you do need to be aware as an applicant the fact that you may be slightly exposed if you're not knowledgeable enough to understand the real value of these services. Now, clearly people must be paid for their time, but there must be a balance and a fairness about the value that's involved. There's a buyer beware sign that we often put out, and that is expats serving fellow expats. You can probably hear from my accent, I'm not South African, but I've spent a lot of time in South Africa, so I say, I'm British and I'm going to help a fellow Brit. Beware of that, because what you're looking for is not nationality-based service, you're looking for expertise. Whatever the nationality of the person is, as long as they're duly qualified to perform it, and they have the representation, for example, in a case like Chase Buchanan, that they are licensed to be able to deliver these across both the UK and Portugal, for example, that's a key element of these sorts of situations, to make sure that you're dealing with duly accredited or credible professionals. The other thing is, if you don't know where you're going, making sure that your partners act regionally. In other words, that they can give you that choice of working in different areas of the country if you're looking at different areas and you don't know exactly where you're going. Overcoming language barriers is important. And the other thing, which is absolutely fundamental, but is often catches us all out, and that is the Portuguese consulates themselves are often applying the rules inconsistently. And then the problem only arises later on when you arrive in Portugal and the local department tells you, no, that's not the right thing. So we actually have this a lot more often than you might think. I'm not going to go through the table again, because I've talked through the differences, but that is a table summarizing the essential differences between the D7 and the Golden Visa. And on one of our websites at the bottom is on the algarveseniorliving.com sites, in the Visas tab and in the Golden Visa Program tab, you will be able to find a little bit more information on this on each of the programs. But Google that. There's a lot of information around, and then validate it with us to make sure that you're reading the right thing. What we wanted to do now as well is just cover briefly before I hand over to Robert, the D7 must-do list. Most people applying to move to Portugal are now applying using the D7 because it doesn't have as heavy or as great a financial requirement in terms of purchasing property and the like. So we've divided this up into three categories of information. Category A is information that is required for the application and must be gathered in the country of origin, in this case primarily the UK. And these steps cannot be handled by anyone else other than you. So even if you have a lawyer, for example, and I don't mean to be picking on lawyers, but even if you have a lawyer saying they can help you, this is not correct, because the consulate will want you to gather this, and even if you have a facilitator like VFS, they will want you to liaise with them directly about this information. So things such as proof of income from pensions, investments, criminal clearance in your country of residence, your identification, letter of motivation, and so on. This must all come from you. And in fact, there's quite some confidential information in there, so you don't necessarily want to be sharing this with a sort of an unknown third party. Okay, so that's category A. Category B, these are steps that require local expertise, but they must be completed in Portugal or obtained in Portugal, but they still must be submitted with the application. So you can't do them afterwards, okay? And again, and I feel a bit bad about mentioning lawyers again, but you know, it is expensive to use a lawyer to gather some of these things or to do some of them. So unless you're using, for example, a lawyer to buy a property, then they can bundle that into a more cost-efficient service. So fiscal number and getting your fiscal number is important. Fiscal representation for all non-EU nationals. This is somebody who represents you in front of the fiscal authorities in Portugal if you're not resident within the EU. Health insurance with minimum levels of coverage, in particular if you fall ill before your entrance interview with SEF. The country wants to know that you're not going to become a burden to the state or on the state. And then having a local and opening a local bank account with proof that it has been funded. And I won't talk about the requirements for funding in this presentation. And then proof of accommodation, as I've talked about, either a residential contract or of at least 6 months, please. I know sometimes they will say they'll accept 3. You will have an issue when you arrive on the ground if you don't have at least 6. Or proof of ownership of an own home. One of the things that we will talk about, not in this presentation, but we encourage you to go to, is this site at the top called movetoportugal101.com. And on that site, we have a list of all these steps that are essential. And if you allow us to, and they're all competitively priced services, finding your NIF and doing all these kind of things, and they're all very, very competitively priced, and we will coordinate this for you so that we can introduce you to the best price sort of services for each of those things in the market. At least those we've been able to find at the moment, and we reserve the right to refresh those. And then category C, which is important but not essential for the visa application, are a few things that we recommend. The Forex account we think is essential. You don't need it for your visa, but please make sure you find a Forex company to make sure that your banks do not rip you off in terms of transferring money from one currency to another. Health insurance once you arrive in country and after your travel insurance is no longer needed. Now you don't need to do this, but we recommend for many expats that they do. It's an extra level of comfort, at least for a period of time. And then applying for things like the NHR, which do have application limit dates. That is more or less my time up. I'm going to spend 30 seconds just pointing you to some sites because we have a lot of them. We're a company that provides quite a lot of information. So if you want to contact us, just use one of the emails. I've picked out one, info@propertyfinderportugal.com. Probably should have been the Move to Portugal 101, but that doesn't matter. And then if you're more focused on retirement and information about that, we have a website for that, Algarve Senior Living. If you're looking for someone to help you source and find a property, propertyfinderportugal.com. If you're just looking for long-term rental, particularly in a certain area like the Algarve Longlets, We have a retirement community site. And then the most important one for this presentation, which is the Move to Portugal 101.com. That sets out a series of steps in terms of what you need to do to make sure that you don't miss anything when you apply for that important D7 visa. And